you are a game designer. Hey there, my name's James Hake. I design games for a living, tabletop games like Dungeons and Dragons. If the algorithm put this in front of you, I'm assuming two things. First, that you know exactly what a tabletop RPG is, so I won't waste your time explaining it to you. Second, you're probably the person that runs the game master. And if you are a game master, you're a game designer. It'll make your home game better to think like the game designer that you are. So, as fellow designers, it's important that we share some common terms, even terms as simple as, what is game design? Well, it'll come as no surprise to learn that making a brand new game, like when John Harper and his team made and published Blades in the Dark, that's game design. This includes designing core mechanics like when to roll dice, what dice you roll, and how you determine success or failure. We'll look closer at core dice mechanics in a future video, but in short, they're the mechanical heart of any role-playing game. There's also subsystems. Hacking a game, or creating supplements to an existing game with fundamentally new ideas, is also game design. When veteran game designer Sean Merwin and I decided to create Raider's Guide to Valikan and Saga of the Seasons, a Viking-themed third-party D&D setting and adventure, we developed new material and the adventure to showcase them. The game materials we developed were based on the engine of 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons, including new subsystems and new material that fit within existing subsystems of 5e. So, a subsystem is any mechanical framework that elaborates on the game's core mechanic. Like in D&D, a character's subclass, and the spells or magic items they gain throughout their adventure and career, those are subsystems. They interact with the D20 roll. On the other hand, the rules for running a chase scene, while also a subsystem, are less likely to feature in every session than a subclass or magic item, but they still need to be just as robust and usable that they can form an exciting set piece and really steal the show when they're being used. Game masters everywhere, particularly for popular games with a significant culture of customization, again, like D&D. We're talking about D&D a lot in this video. Engage in system levels design all the time. Whenever a game designer like you or me creates a monster, they're engaging in the act of game design, but just within the system's extant subsystems. For a particularly ambitious design, you may design a brand new subsystem to better represent your creative ideas. In Ethereal Expanse, a high magic piratical setting and adventure, designer Sam Mannell created an extremely in-depth naval combat system. Its focus on believable naval maneuvers and involving all members of the crew in ship engagements made it all but incompatible with most D&D subsystems, but it became more of a minigame to switch to when the D&D rules stopped supporting the piratical story we wanted to tell. MCDM did something similar when publishing their books Strongholds and Followers and Kingdoms and Warfare, two supplements that mechanicalize mass combat, even if it meant ignoring the game's core system for just a little bit. Wizards of the Coast, however, as the game's publisher, has a duty to those core systems. In 2015, Wizards released an Unearthed Arcana playtest of rules for mass combat, when armies clash, to simulate epic battles. It wasn't well received, but they tried again in 2017, and when that playtest also flopped, well, they threw in the towel. Those subsystems were either too disparate from D&D's core to feel cohesive with the rest of the game, or they relied too much on D&D's core and bogged down the narrative in mismatched mechanics. By 2020, in Explorer's Guide to Wildemount, a setting racked by war between two empires, Wizards gave advice that cut the Gordian knot. Use normal encounter design to just avoid the situation entirely. Focus on the actions of the player characters within the larger context of war. Curiously, in 2022, they reverse course again. The adventure Dragonlance: Shadow of the Dragon Queen features several battles where the armies of good and evil clash. Wizards' recommendation? Consider using the board game, Dragonlance Warriors of Krynn, to model these conflicts. With those examples in mind, I think tying all of your core mechanics together in an elegant, unified system is best. It's more approachable for new players, which is a huge hurdle in trying to get people to try a new RPG, and it's better for existing players as well, even if it's just for a table of your 4 closest friends. You don't want to risk alienating existing players who already like the game that they're playing for a reason. So really, good game design is about knowing your audience. Not everyone likes everything. So if you can create an experience that speaks to the people you want it to speak to, your design is a success, no matter how obtuse it is. Beyond systems design, which has been the focus of this video so far, there are whole universes of game design. Just building an encounter makes you a game designer. If you do it haphazardly or without any knowledge of how to design games, it might make you a haphazard and unpracticed game designer, but you are still engaging in the art of game design by doing so. Making a map and putting enemy figures on it, creating a social scene set at a gala ball, and deciding which nobles will be there and what secrets they're hiding. Even just stocking a magic item shop with things to buy, or adjusting a monster's attacks on the fly. Those are game design. Just look at the credits for any game released by a AAA video game studio in the past 20 years. You'll see credits for level designer, which is the equivalent of what the D&D world calls encounter design. Systems designer, which had been the focus of the first half of this video. UI or UX designer, which in RPG terms is the graphic design of its rulebook and its tactile peripherals, from dice to cards to character sheets. Narrative designer, which includes every game master who does even the slightest bit more than narrate a procession of endless dungeon chambers, and I think even includes some players who engage in the art of world building while making their character's backstory. There are also content designers, close cousins of the narrative designer, who handle the fine-grained details of individual quests. If you're a professional working in tabletop RPGs, you don't need me to tell you this. You probably don't even have one of these titles. Very few of us do. You probably have a more generic title, like game designer or senior game designer, and it means you'll be wearing a lot of hats. You'll be doing bits and pieces of each type of design based on the needs of your project and where you and your collaborators' skill sets lie. If you're a game master designing for your home table, or even a hobbyist or an indie self-publishing on Kickstarter or DriveThruRPG or itch.io, you almost certainly don't have one of those titles. You're probably wearing every hat at once. In that case, it's not just important to know what each type of design is, it's vital, because you got to do it all. And each one of those domains of design are worth analysis in future videos. We'll talk about them all later. If you're looking in from the world of video games, this might seem like the Wild West. A bunch of designers, all with overlapping specializations, doing all sorts of different types of design at once. But in the early days of the hobby, these roles didn't even exist. Professional game designers who made D&D, Dave Arneson, Gary Gygax, they wore every hat imaginable in order to make these games more than a formless idea. And truth be told, this often led to bad design. I mean, in the 70s, the rules of D&D were labyrinthine, uncoordinated, contradictory, notably in how the rules could never seem to agree if the game's core mechanic was aiming for a high target number, then adding numbers to a d20 roll, aiming for a low number and subtracting from your d20 roll, or using percentile dice and then checking a table. Worse, they were split across 2 completely different games, neither of which fully played ball with the other one. Gary Gygax's creation, first edition Dungeons & Dragons, was popular, but its convolutions led to a more basic rules-light version of the game being dominant over the more highly codified, advanced Dungeons & Dragons system. At the time, at least. In his book, Designers and Dragons, gaming historian Shannon Appelkline notes this simpler game's meteoric success. J. Eric Holmes's Dungeons & Dragons basic set was a revision of Gygax and Arneson's original RPG, intended to increase access to D&D through maximum availability and minimum difficulty. The result? A bestseller that got out into the mass market just as Holmes hoped. So all the way back in 1977, we can see an inflection point of where and when game design happens. Holmes Basic, as this sub-edition of D&D is known today, was somewhat freeform and offered referees, read Dungeon Masters, the opportunity to make their own decisions. Meanwhile, Gary Gygax was already working on a more complex version of D&D that he called Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, which was a more rigorously defined game system, intended to codify D&D. This was partly done to better support tournament play, but Gygax had also grown increasingly unhappy with how D&D was being played differently all across the world. So he wrote a game that was less open-ended and had more control over its audience. In those days, the sparse nature of the game rules meant that every GM had to be a game designer to fill the holes left by pros like Holmes. That's not the case these days, though modern D&D does adopt a rulings not rules approach, a lesson learned from taking Gygax's attempts at total control over a player base that notoriously rankles at corporate control over the way they play the game. I think it's a good thing that some of the gaping holes in Holmes' basic D&D were filled in by new rules. I'm glad that Gary Gygax's authoritarian dream of a worldwide unified RPG rule set isn't the main way to play RPGs. A tabletop RPG is by nature as much of a game-making kit as it is a complete game. Its core systems have to be flexible enough to support GM-created design, while robust and intelligible enough to give GMs the confidence needed to design for themselves, and not rely solely on pre-written adventure material. This is an axis of game design quality that video games simply don't have. It's one of the things that make tabletop games so unique and so valuable. But if a professional game designer has the responsibility to give a GM freedom, where do you draw the line between a well-designed game and an under-designed game? Professionals will discover that through mass playtesting. But ultimately, it's all in your vision for the game and how you want to support the GM. There are lots of games out there that don't support the GM very well, and there are lots that support them too much. Good user experience design is making sure the game master has enough information to be a good creative partner in absentia. In the 70s, GMs were called referees because they were seen as tournament-like adjudicators of the rules, like a computer running a video game. But now, 50 years later, we think quite differently. The rules are important, they define the intended play experience, but they're there to support you, not the other way around. You are a game designer. Be empowered by this, not burdened. You may be creating an experience for people, but it doesn't mean you're responsible for their fun. I've lost sleep over whether or not the people at my table are having fun, but a game designer isn't responsible for how much fun the players have. Yeah, we want players to have fun, of course, or sometimes more than fun. To feel powerful emotions, for example, is a good reason to design an experience that isn't fun. But even in games where fun is the main intended feeling, tabletop games and video games are more than just roller coasters. Sandbox video games like The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom exemplify this by giving you tools to make your own fun or find one of the world's corners of zen-like peace to take in the quiet majesty of the world around you. Bearing the power and responsibility of being a game designer as a game master doesn't replace the fact that you are also a player. You're both, and you gain all the benefits of both. The creative control of a designer, and the opportunity to be surprised that being a player affords. Blades in the Dark designer John Harper spoke to the benefits of letting go of the desire to make the game fun in an online interview with the Stream of Blood podcast in 2021.
My gaming got a lot better when I kind of shifted my mind to, I'm here to be entertained by the players. And not that I don't have any responsibilities or I'm just going to sit there and stare at them and be like, okay, now what? I still want to bring my play to the game as a co-player in our shared hobby. But if I think of, oh man, I can't wait to see what Chris does tonight. I can't wait to see what Allison does tonight. Like if I come to game night with that mentality and the players like understand that and they're like, okay, oh, I'm going to bring it so much. My character, I'm going to fucking drive a stake through the heart of this game tonight. If that's the group dynamic, the GM job just changes so much. And it's so much fun to show up and be like, oh, what are you guys going to do? This is going to be the best.
At the end of the day, the most important facet of good tabletop design is for you to facilitate self-directed fun, not mandate it. The improvisational nature of the tabletop medium, freed from the rigid limitations of computer code, makes finding self-directed fun the medium's greatest strength. A good game system should facilitate that fun for both the players and the game master. And the places where an RPG isn't explicit in its intent, the places where a game master must step up and collaborate indirectly with the game's developers as a co-designer, are features, not bugs. Thanks for listening. The topic of this first video is the bedrock that this channel is based on. From here on out, I'm hoping to take a microscope to topics that will make your tabletop game design better. We're building a community here, folks. A fun little niche where game design-brained weirdos like you and me can volley ideas and talk about the ideas underlying this hobby/profession/subculture that we've all somehow become a part of. Where we can build games and share them and give good, supportive critique. So if you like this video and you want to see more, please do subscribe, and let me know in the comments about your favorite places, items, or scenarios that you've designed in RPGs you've GM'd. I want to hear from you. The games you play and the way you play them, I care about that. Knowing how people play games is a part of how designers grow. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you again in the next one.